Good evening, everybody. I have a great show for you tonight. So, I just to start out with, I just read this article. Here I have it with me. Why cancel culture is good for democracy. It's by the Rolling Stones. You can go look it up and read it if you want to, but do it at your own risk. It's awful. And I wanted to talk about this. So, there's something so the article is awful in a million different ways, but there's one thing in particular that I want to talk about. So in this article, they said that cancel culture is good because it allows us to stand up against the rich white men in power because the system won't allow us to. And this is something I want to get to. A lot of these people, leftists, progressives, Democrats, some liberals, um, believe that they are speaking truth to power, that they're the little person fighting against the corrupt, evil overlords. The truth couldn't be farther from the truth. For example, I have Democrats in my family, and they view the world as this. My Democrat family members view it like this, that they're standing up against the evil overlords or whatever, or they're really sticking up for the people that society or the man hates the most. So in reality, let's take what cancel culture is talking about with stuff like canceling people for racism, canceling people for sexism, that sort of stuff. Now, so in Canada, Australia, Europe, almost all of Europe, all over the world, they have hate speech laws. And what these are is if you do anything that the government labels to be racist, sexist, homophobic, or transphobic, then they'll arrest you. So, and there's been people working class people who've been arrested for doing stuff that their states have deemed homophobic or transphobic. We see this in England and Ireland. It's probably the worst in Germany, I think, from what I've heard. Though I have not yet visited Germany, so I can't say this personally. And this is what it is. So what I'm getting at here is these are the states, the biggest countries in the West, using their laws and their force and their police to enforce cancel culture on normal people, many of which are working class. And we're supposed to believe that cancel culture is speaking truth to power. This is like with communists. Communists always act like they're so edgy. But in reality, the people who truly rule the world, or at least the West, like communists and like the fact that there's communists because they know that communism is degenerate and communism will make the West degenerate. Communism will make white people degenerate. The social Marxist globalists created communism to make white people the worst versions of themselves they could be because the social Marxist globalists want white people to be the worst versions of themselves they can possibly be because that would make it a lot easier for social Marxist globalists to replace us. It's like that stone toss meme. What is it? It's so there's the photo of the pig with someone's looking at their phone and on the phone there's a pig with a top hat and a monocle and it says global hegemony supports trans rights. That's where we're at right now. These pro-homosexual and pro-transvestite activists always act like they're so edgy and they're standing up against the man. But what do we see in reality? We see all of these huge multi-billion-dollar corporations, all of whom I would describe as evil. They are evil. Oreos, Nesquik, these are evil companies. They're evil. And they show the rainbow flag. They say trans rights, and they are extremely evil. I don't know if they. I'm not sure they genuinely believe in homosexuality or transvestitism, because in a capitalist society, companies will do whatever they think will make the most money. But whether they believe in it or not, they're supporting it, and it is deeply degenerate. And these companies are evil, regardless of whether they support degenerate things like transvestism and homosexuality. These multi-billion-dollar international companies are all run by social Marxist globalists, and they all support white genocide, or at least lower white birth rates to replace white people. I, I, I saw this meme, and it was like, what left-wing libertarians think to themselves. And the left-wing libertarian was thinking to himself, I am standing up against the man and standing up against society, even though I have the same opinions and the same beliefs as every big corporation and every state and every celebrity. And that is really how society is at this point. The people who act like they're so edgy, um, the people who are saying, "Oh, down with white people, go for communism, homosexuality and transvestitism, we need to normalize it." Um, they hold the same beliefs as Hollywood. They hold the same beliefs as the White House. They hold the same beliefs as the banks. They hold the same beliefs as the mainstream media. They hold the same beliefs as celebrities all over the world. So I also want to talk about the pro-Palestinian protesters who are doing stuff like shutting down the Golden Gate Bridge and shutting down traffic. So now you can say whatever you want about these people. You can say, oh, we need to follow the laws. So breaking the law is always wrong. We can only have peaceful protest. Or you can say, if you're protesting against an active genocide that the US is funding, supporting, and sponsoring and endorsing, when it could stop it at any moment, then yes, you should break laws anyways, because we need to stop genocide. Um, and we need to stop Zionism. We need to stop anti-white racism, all of which Israel supports. Um, but regardless of what you feel on this issue, there's something I want to talk about. These protesters are getting much more hatred than the Black Lives Matter protesters of before. For example, the Congress just released a resolution that said, "From the river to the sea" is an anti-Semitic slogan. Now, the people who are chanting, I believe the specific language they used is it's a genocidal statement. Now, the people who use that statement, obviously there's exception to this, but the vast majority of Americans that use that statement, that use that slogan, what they actually mean is we want Israel to stop existing and instead Palestine to become a liberal secular democracy. So then the Palestinian people will be free as they're currently enslaved by Israel. So that's what they mean when Palestine be free from the river to the sea. And the politicians that created this resolution and voted for it, they know that. They absolutely know that. They just want, they just said otherwise because they're evil, because they're liars, because they'll do anything for degeneracy. So, but did the Congress during these violent Black Lives Matter riots ever say pass a resolution that says Black Lives Matter is a anti-white genocide slogan, or Black Lives Matter is an anti-white genocide organization, or Black Lives Matter is or say all cops are bastards, I believe is the slogan, or all cops are bad is a genocidal slogan. The only good cop is a dead cop is a genocidal slogan. None of this happened. Fox News recently did a piece where they said that we should promote violence against pro-Palestinian protesters. They said, when people glue their hands to the street or the car, rip that skin off and throw them off bridges. Now, this was talking about stuff like the Golden Gate Bridge shut down, and if you throw someone off the Golden Gate Bridge, they'll die. There's been lots of people who've committed suicide by jumping off of the Golden State Bridge. And out of all the people who've jumped off the Golden State Bridge, over 90% of them died. So Fox News is promoting active calls for murder against pro-Palestinian protesters. That's where we're at right now. Fox News didn't do that with Black Lives Matter. MSNBC didn't do that with Black Lives Matter. CNN didn't do that with Black Lives Matter. The mainstream media didn't do that with Black Lives Matter, and no one did that with Black Lives Matter. But these protests are obviously so much more morally better, morally superior to the Black Lives Matter protests. So both of them have gotten illegal. They illegally shut down a bridge, and they've been illegally shutting down traffic for the pro-Palestinian protests. And I have criticism of this, which I'm about to share, but in the Black Lives Matter protests, they did much more violence. They did over $2 billion of damage. They started mass fires that burned down lots of stores. They did all sorts of looting. There was constant looting. There were people who were murdered. It was all sorts of stuff. But let's say, for the purposes of this discussion, that the amount of destruction and damage and violence and looting was equal on both sides. It's not, but let's say it was equal. So the pro-Palestinian protesters have a lot better reason for their protesting than the Black Lives Matter protesters. So I personally believe that George Floyd died of a drug overdose. He was saying, we have video evidence of him saying, "I can't breathe," before the police officer put his knee on his neck. But let's say, for the purposes of this discussion, even though this isn't true, that George Floyd didn't die of an overdose. He did die from the police officer putting his neck on his knee. And this wasn't a mistake by the police officer or anything. The police officer was an evil white supremacist who purposefully murdered George Floyd purely because of the color of his skin. In that case, if that is true, which it isn't, then these pro-Palestinian protesters would have an infinitely better reason for protesting than the Black Lives Matter protesters. Tell me, what's worse? One single man who was a criminal, a career criminal, someone who physically assaulted a woman, who traumatized a woman, and was a smudge in society, according to every record, being murdered, or a mass genocide, a mass bombing that kills tens of thousands of innocent civilians, tens of thousands of women, tens of thousands of children, with purposefully murdering them, purposefully ordered to murder them, and endorsed by the U.S. government openly. It wasn't like so Donald Trump didn't say, let's murder George Floyd. I'm going to go murder George Floyd. But Joe Biden is currently saying, I'm going to give billions of dollars of aid and U.S. weapons to Israel, even though we all know, everyone knows, that Israel is using all its money and weapons to fund its genocide against Palestine. Everyone knows that. So Palestine should be infinitely, a billion, a trillion times worse than the George Floyd incident. Even if you give the George Floyd incident the worst possible interpretation, that there were no drugs involved, that this was a purposeful murder that was consciously decided by an evil white supremacist police officer purely for George Floyd's skin color, then it's still infinitely worse. The Palestine genocide is still infinitely worse than the George Floyd incident. And that's just undebatable. That's just a fact. So the pro-Palestinian protesters are doing less damage, they're doing less violence, they're committing less crimes, they're doing less harm, they're costing the US people less money, and they have an infinitely better reason for protesting in the first place. The pro-Palestinian protesters are protesting for a good reason, because Israel is evil, while the Black Lives Matter protesters were protesting for a bad reason. George Floyd wasn't murdered, and if he did, the death of one single man isn't something worth having a giant protest over in that context. Now, so I said I have issues with the pro-Palestinian protesters. So I personally don't think, I'm not sure I would say that shutting down the roads is the best decision, because a lot of those people who are getting blocked by these road jams, they don't have anything to do with Palestine. What I think is a lot better is in cases when people, so Joe Biden can't go anywhere without people shouting Genocide Joe into his ears, as he should. He shouldn't be allowed to live a happy life at this point. He should suffer for the rest of his life for this, for his policy on Israel. I want Joe Biden to suffer for the rest of his entire life. I want the rest of his entire life to be misery for his policy on Israel. If the rest of Mr. Joe Biden's life is a miserable hell, then he would deserve it because of his stance on Israel. If you use our money and our weapons, the weapons that are supposed to keep us safe, and hand them over to Israel so Israel can commit genocide, you use them for genocide, then you deserve to have your whole life ruined. You don't deserve happiness. You don't deserve comfort. You don't deserve a smile. You don't deserve safety. You don't deserve peace of mind. So I love it that Joe Biden's being harassed by protesters. And I love it when I see Zionist politicians, American Zionist politicians, being harassed and booed at, and having their speeches ruined and being talked over. This is absolutely wonderful. But a lot of the people who are just on trying to go over the Golden State Bridge or whatever, aren't writing laws or supporting genocide personally. So since a lot of those people were innocent, I'm not sure I support this. But again, the genocide is really, really awful, so I can sort of sympathize with them, though I think the strategy might not be ideal. And this doesn't just go for politicians. If I ever see someone in an IDF uniform or an IDF soldier or an Israeli soldier, I'm going to spit in their face because they deserve it. Well, I think I'm going to call it good for today's video. I know I went a really long time without uploading any videos, and I'm sorry about that, but I'm going to try to get on a better schedule. But anyways, good night, good evening, and God